The moment the billionaire boss grabbed the grease-stained collar of the mechanic, the entire service hall seemed to shrink, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, because this was not just anger exploding in public, it was a collision of two lives that had once shared the same dreams, the same hunger, and the same broken past. The mechanic's hands were black with oil, his shoulders bent from years of silent labor, while the man towering over him wore a tailored suit and a face hardened by power, yet behind that power trembled something fragile and unfinished. This was the second when humiliation met memory, when pride met regret, and when one whispered question threatened to undo everything both men had become. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us we are all still human no matter how high or how low we stand, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel, Lonely Dad Strong Heart. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Years before that moment, the mechanic had not always been a mechanic. He had once been a young man with restless eyes and a mind full of ideas, working long nights in a cramped garage that smelled of metal and ambition. He believed that honest work could change a life, that effort could bend fate. But life did not bend easily for him. Responsibilities arrived early, losses arrived faster, and dreams were quietly packed away to make room for survival. He learned to measure days by the weight of exhaustion in his bones rather than by hope. Each morning he tied his worn boots, kissed the photograph of his late wife taped inside his locker, and reminded himself that dignity could exist even when dreams did not. The billionaire boss had once stood beside him in that same garage, their hands equally dirty, their laughter equally loud. They had shared cheap meals, bold plans, and a belief that they would rise together. But when opportunity knocked, it did not knock for both. One path led upward, paved with investors, risk, and ruthless decisions. The other path stayed behind, paved with responsibility, loyalty, and sacrifice. Over time, distance became silence, and silence hardened into misunderstanding. The man who rose learned to see weakness as something to conquer, not something to protect. The man who stayed learned that pride could survive even when recognition did not. On the day of the humiliation, the mechanic was only doing his job, focused, careful, invisible like always. The service center buzzed with movement, but attention snapped toward him when the billionaire's voice cut through the noise. The accusation was sharp, public, and cruel, stripping years of quiet effort into a single moment of shame. The billionaire's grip on his collar was not just about a mistake or a delay, it was about dominance, about proving that the distance between them was now permanent and unquestionable. For the mechanic, the heat in his chest was not anger but a familiar ache, the ache of being seen only for what he had become, not for who he still was. As the billionaire leaned closer, the world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. Then the whisper came, barely louder than a thought, asking whether the mechanic still cared. That question did what shouting never could. It cracked open years of buried emotion, guilt that had never found words, love that had never been allowed to survive success. In that instant, the billionaire was no longer a symbol of power but a man terrified of being forgotten by the one person who knew him before money rewrote his name. The mechanic did not answer with words. His silence carried years of disappointment, loyalty, and unhealed wounds. He remembered the nights he waited for calls that never came, the news articles that celebrated a friend who never looked back, and the birthdays his child spent without gifts because pride would not let him ask for help. He remembered choosing stability over ambition, choosing family over fame, and accepting that some people outgrow the places where they were once equal. The billionaire felt that silence like a verdict. Power could buy applause, obedience, and fear, but it could not buy forgiveness. For the first time in years, he noticed the lines on the mechanic's face, the stiffness in his hands, the way responsibility had aged him faster than time. He saw the cost of the road he had not taken. The humiliation he had delivered so easily began to taste bitter, because it reflected the person he had become, not the man he once promised to be. Days passed after that encounter, but the moment refused to fade. The mechanic returned to his routine, yet something had shifted. He felt lighter, not because he had been validated, but because the truth had finally surfaced. He realized he no longer needed recognition from a past that had already taken enough from him. His worth had been proven in quieter ways, in resilience, in raising his child alone, in never allowing bitterness to turn into cruelty. For the billionaire, sleep became difficult. Success no longer felt clean. Every achievement echoed with the memory of that whisper. He began revisiting old places, old photos, old versions of himself he had abandoned. The higher he climbed, the lonelier the view became. He understood too late that winning without integrity is just another form of loss. When they met again, it was not in a service hall but in a place stripped of status. The billionaire arrived without cameras, without entourage, carrying only the weight of honesty he had avoided for years. The mechanic listened, not because he owed forgiveness, but because he had grown strong enough to choose compassion without surrendering self-respect. Healing did not come instantly. Trust did not rebuild overnight. But something real began, something grounded not in the past but in accountability. The mechanic's life did not transform into wealth or fame, and it did not need to. What changed was recognition of his own value. He stood taller, spoke firmer, and allowed himself moments of hope again. His child noticed the difference first, the way laughter returned, the way stories at night carried less exhaustion and more warmth. The billionaire learned humility the hard way. He invested not only in businesses but in people, in listening, in repairing rather than conquering. He learned that true leadership begins with responsibility for the harm one causes. The whisper that once exposed his fear became a promise to live differently. As this story unfolds, remember that sometimes the most powerful moments are not loud victories but quiet reckonings. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment near the end of this video to like, share, and subscribe to Lonely Dad Strong Heart. Your engagement tells us these stories matter. And before this video ends, leave a comment sharing your thoughts or your own experience with second chances, because your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. In the end, the mechanic did not gain riches, and the billionaire did not lose his empire, but both gained something far more lasting: the courage to face who they were, the humility to accept who they had become, and the understanding that care does not disappear just because life pulls people apart. Sometimes, all it takes is one painful moment, one whispered question, to remind us that beneath every title, every failure, and every success, a human heart is still waiting to be seen.